HBCUs produce disproportionately higher numbers in every profession. It's the pipeline.
Despite being a small sliver of the universities and colleges in America, according to statistics, graduate about 20% of Black college graduates. That's not that HBCUs lack in giving people a quality education. There's a lot of issues that HBCUs face, infrastructure being number one. Having the proper buildings, making sure that those buildings are up to code, making sure that there aren't rats and mold and roaches in those buildings, making sure that kids have, there's access to different books, making sure they have access to food and all of those things that it takes to run a university. When you're looking at the infrastructure, you're looking at how much money federally that they're getting from and have gotten for generations, that there's not as much as they want, and more importantly, as much as they need. And then there's also this idea of being able to do a lot more R&D, research and development. That is another place in which the President's Build Back Better agenda has money for these institutions. This is an administration that came in and made a lot of big promises. When President Biden was kind of running and talking about like the funding that minority serving institutions would receive, the number was $45 billion. And that's for HBCUs, MSIs, and tribal schools. So when Congress actually made and took the proposal and wrote it as the first bill, that number got cut and got cut hard to like $2 billion. Biden did not cut this. And there's been some misinformation out there that Biden was the one that cut this. This came from the conversations with members of Congress amongst themselves as they negotiated this bill. Because there's such a slim majority, there's not a lot of political ability to give a lot more than they already are receiving. So that creates this tension point that the administration is going to have to deal with for the rest of its time. They have very slim majorities. Any senator can have the power. And so you hear and you have this huge blowback from HBCUs and advocates in saying that's not going to cut it. And so then the number jumped back up. So now the number is at $10 billion. And in there is $2 billion of that is for the infrastructure for HBCUs specifically. And that is a lot more money than they've gotten historically, right? Like we're usually talking about the millions when you're talking about money for HBCUs. And so that is the expectation. But again, what they're saying, HBCUs and their advocates is like, oh no, we like that, but we still deserve and want more, and you promised more. And one thing when I talked to the students, they said when Vice President Harris was chosen by Biden, they were so excited. One, because, she's a Black woman. And most importantly for them is because she went to Howard and went to an HBCU. While she was a senator, she also pushed and was able to secure more funding for HBCUs. The students said, this is about how HBCUs can send people out into the world and they can really make it, right? It doesn't get much better, right, than vice president of the most powerful country on the planet, other than president, obviously. And so for them, it was a moment where people started to see HBCUs differently. That also made them feel more empowered to do and bring more attention to the plight that they have right now. Another thing is that the kids wanted to see her out front more on HBCUs. And I will say that is something that's been happening. She also has behind the scenes been calling members of Congress who work on this issue, and we're making sure that more funding got into the BBB proposal. She's clearly involved, but then there is for some of these kids a disconnect between what they're seeing and what the reality is. And that's a messaging problem more so than anything else. So this administration, for example, has this HBCU advisory board, and that is where they're going to try to find ways to get around funding issues, right? This administration really wants to try to figure out what are the ways that we can actually help these institutions, even if we can't pass another huge bill to do so. I find it unlikely if the number dwindles back down again, as the conversations about what needs to be pulled out of BBB in the Senate, when you hear Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema talking about it, we have not heard one time that I can remember of them talking about HBCU funding needing to go down. So it seems, and the advocates that I've spoken to, they feel confident that this is going to happen, that they're going to get this amount of money. And so the next step is just waiting for the House and the Senate to pass it. And then that money starts to trickle out into the HBCU community.